Today on 100 Huntley Street, we're continuing our week about love. We're going to be talking about love languages and how we can better experience and express our love to our significant others. Plus, we're talking about the role of sacred prayer on our journey to intimacy, and it all starts right now. And we are so glad you've joined us for this special week of programming about the most powerful love of all. We're talking about God's love, right?
That's right.
But also how love in our marriages needs to have God at the very center in order for those relationships to thrive.
That's right. That mutual connection to God in a marriage, it just changes everything. It's such a partnership and a covenant, really.
It really is.
That's a big word. But, you know, in our humanness, we don't always necessarily feel the love in our relationships. And if you've been married long enough, you know those ups and downs. But what's interesting, C.S. Lewis, this amazing writer, scholar, theologian, just an incredible, man.
Came to faith. He was actually an atheist.
Yeah, he was an atheist.
He came to faith in Christ. But
he had to say this, that love, in all of his studies of the Bible, love is really not an act of the will or of a feeling. It's actually, love is an act of the will.
Yeah.
Oh, I just said it wrong.
Mark's it's not a feeling, because oftentimes we can get wrapped up in feelings.
Got it mixed.
It's an act of will. And he kind of breaks it down sort of into five sort of categories. Love as an act of will. True Christian love is not driven by feelings, but by the will. A conscious choice to love regardless of emotional state.
Yeah.
I mean, if we just loved like that, I think we're covering all the bases. But he has more to say.
Yes, we have to remember duty over desire. So while emotional affection is ideal in a relationship, know that love is a commanded action. So even when your feelings aren't naturally present, we have to stand firm in that duty of loving the other.
That's right. And with that, learning to love others, maybe sometimes the prickly, quote unquote, others in our lives, just as naturally as we love ourselves. Christian love involves cultivating the same willing commitment towards others, even when those feelings don't come naturally.
That's right. And remember that affections can enhance love. So even though love is a choice of the will, when affections align with that will, and you'll have those wonderful peaks too in your marriages.
The puppy love.
The puppy love. Yeah. And then it's also the we made it to 20 years love. No, I'm just kidding. I have that. That's cool. You're
27
wow.
for us this year.
I know. See, congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you, Jesus.
Praise God, right? Yeah, because it's not easy. It's a marathon. And I always say how being married is actually it's a discipling process. You're becoming more like Jesus through your marriage because you serve the other and serve God in the process.
And so we don't leave you hanging.
No.
Last but not least, love beyond emotion. So Christian love is not an emotional reaction, but a steadfast decision to act in love. Yeah. Making it both I love this how he says, both moral and spiritual discipline. So it's tied to our spiritual discipline.
It certainly is.
We've got some work to do in our relationships.
We all do.
For sure.
We all do.
Not just our marriages.
Nope.
But I'm so glad for your guests today, Daniel and Christina Im.
And they're a couple who really had to go through this process of hearing from God about being a couple and getting married, and then making those conscious decisions to be obedient to God and to step forward in marriage. And today they are so active in ministry, and they've been through their ups and downs.
Absolutely.
But they are a thriving couple, and so we're really excited to have them with us on the program.
Absolutely. And for many, it can be in preparation for a committed relationship, or perhaps after years of marriage, having God at the center of that relationship in order to help us through navigate those waters of change. A little bit later in the program, we're going to talk about love languages, because the theme is love this week. So we're going to leave that for a little bit. But I think, because I want to know what yours is, I'm going to tell you what mine is. But I think I know what Daniel Im's love language is. It's definitely words of affirmation, because we love the encouragement that he has here on the program for us. Let's go to that chat right now.
Strong marriages are the bedrock of Canadian family life. Joining me now is Pastor Daniel Im and his wife Christina Im, founders of the In Between podcast. Welcome to 100 Huntley Street on the road in Edmonton, Alberta, Daniel and Christina.
Oh, thank you so much for having us. We're so thrilled to be here.
Yeah. I'm so excited to be with you guys. And Christina, this is a highlight for me. About 1.5 years, 2 years in the making.
Yes, we've been talking about this for a long time, and finally...
this mysterious woman finally shows up.
You get to meet my better half, so...
That's not better half.
Yes,
no,
trust me.
It's so good. I'm thinking of your podcast right now. This is exactly the honest, authentic kind of banter, and I love it. Well, you guys have a beautiful story of how you met. It's connected to serving God and a beautiful missions trip you guys were on. Tell our viewers, you can go back and forth. I think we really want to hear this story.
Yeah, totally. So we were both in university. I was at UBC, Christina was at Carleton, and we met on a mission trip.
Exactly. So a little background before then is that leading up to this missions trip, I was asking people to financially support and prayerfully support. And 3 different couples actually came up to me and said, yes, we will financially support you. But more than that, we're going to prayerfully support you because we believe that we hear from God and the Holy Spirit that you're going to meet your future husband on this missions trip.
Separate couples. They weren't talking to each other. They didn't know. Yeah.
And it was kind of that message of like, okay, God, you have my attention, but this is pretty freaky.
Yeah. And then when we got to the mission trip, it's interesting because I got there and immediately I heard this laugh. And you'll hear it through this interview, right? Like Christina has a beautiful
definite
laugh. Yeah. And there are many different versions of the laugh. And I was like, who is that? And I saw her talking with her friends, and immediately I was like, who is that woman? So from the beginning, there's something about Christina, but it wasn't the same way for her.
No, I actually looked around there were 60 students there. I looked around and I was like, not attractive, not attractive. Sorry, not attractive in my opinion at that time.
Yeah, I didn't make the cut at the beginning.
Yeah. So I was like, well, this must be false. We're just going to live life and go on from there.
Yeah.
But as we got to know each other, I just really started to notice how he loved God so much and just the life of integrity and a faith that he wanted to live. And so that kind of opened up my eyes a little bit. Another instance was that my roommate at the time was asking me, like, why are you and Daniel not together? It was about 3 weeks into the missions trip. And I had a whole sorts of reasons. And she said, I think you really need to prayerfully consider this because you are being selfish. The different reasons that I had. One reason was he was Asian. Another one, he was younger. Another one was that it was long distance. And so she was basically saying, Christina, pray about it because maybe you're putting blocks in the way that are not meant to be there. So that night I prayed and I said, God, if my heart is in the wrong place, could you change it? Just open my eyes to what you want. And that night I had a dream that I was supposed to marry him.
Yeah.
My face just dropped. I was like, so God answers in a dream.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it was, the dream specifically was that a gentleman who I don't know, he represented every creature comfort of the world. And he had asked me to marry him. And I said yes, and we were kind of rejoicing. Then Daniel comes into the picture, and he asks me, will you marry me? And I burst out crying because I say, well, Daniel, I wanted to say yes to you because you represent following God wholeheartedly. Doesn't mean we're going to have every comfort in the world, but we're going to follow God wholeheartedly. And that's the greatest adventure I want to be on. But I just said yes to this guy, so what am I going to do? And I remember waking up from that dream and just being flabbergasted. Like, what do we do now? But that morning when we saw each other at breakfast, like, I don't even know if you realize, I must have been blushing and just really nervous.
I already liked her at this point, but as you can tell, there's no way that I would be able to, I needed God's help, essentially. So he helped me.
I needed God's help.
Speaking through dreams and visions to Christina. And yeah, what is it now? 18 years married, 20 years since this has happened, 3 kids now, so.
It's incredible.
It is the greatest adventure we've ever been on.
It certainly is. And I love how much, Daniel, you really understood who Christina was right away. You were like, this is the one. And Christina, God's working through and in different ways. Because sometimes we put our own expectations of what we think is the right fit for us. But God has a whole other vision for our lives.
So my prayer, and I know as humans, we all have different, like Christina, we have these different expectations of who we want to marry and who we're attracted to and all of that. And I remember there was this moment where I had this list and I was like, God, this doesn't matter. I would love if my future wife plays piano so that we could worship together and we can do, and I had all these things and I was like, in the end, God, it doesn't matter. What matters most is that I would marry someone who loves you as much as I love you. And that's what I started, and that was before I met Christina, and that's what I started praying. And in the end, when I met her, there was just this love that she had for God that was contagious.
And it's so incredible the way God brought you both together. It's very miraculous, but it comes out of those submitted hearts to God in the end, saying, okay, God, your will, not mine necessarily. And then this great adventure and this great love story has unfolded. Today, you're both leading in the area of marriage and family life with actually Family Life Canada. Yeah. But you hit your bumps in the road too, even as a married couple.
Oh, yeah.
And there was this point, you had 2 young kids. There was a lot of turmoil going on in terms of calling and where, you had been serving in ministry, layers like that. Tell us about this breaking point, what led up to it, and what was happening in your marriage all those years ago.
Well, I think it's a lot even before then. It's just our family of origin, looking at our parents, seeing how they managed conflict. And it was different. For my family, we would yell at each other and then just go silent. And for your family, you would just go silent. Yeah. So we brought these 2 differing opinions and ways of handling conflict together. And I would just yell at him, and then he would kind of go silent and retreat. And it was just this cycle of I'm pursuing him by yelling at him, and he's withdrawing because he's feeling afraid, and he doesn't want to say something that's going to hurt me, and so he withdraws. And so it was just this cycle. And it lasted for about 7 years. That's the way we handled conflict, but we came to a breaking point where that way of handling conflict just wasn't working for us. And so I remember this even talking to my mom about we are in such a place where we cannot make this important decision, whether we should move away or stay where we are in terms of ministry. And she was like, well, I'm just going to pray for you because I feel as though this has gone on long enough. It was a year before we were able to really come together, submit our desires and our wills before God and make a choice together. But there were times where I was like, I don't think we're going to make it.
Yeah, because essentially what was happening is we were both convinced that the other wasn't hearing from God, right? I was convinced that God was leading us into this new ministry and to move. And I was praying, and I had all of these moments where I was like, no, God, you are leading us. And I believe I had heard from him, and I was praying for Christina that God would change her heart. And the same thing was going the other way.
Exactly. I was praying, God, show him he's wrong.
Yeah.
Show him that I'm right.
Yeah. I get it.
Yeah. And it was so hard, right? Because we were both convinced that we had both heard from God and the other hadn't. And it was so interesting because for a year this had gone on, and I remember the day I came home, and you were asking others to pray for you. I was asking others to pray for me, and there's this moment where I remember coming home, and I was like, you know what? If my marriage and our relationship is breaking down because we feel like maybe God is calling us to move, or maybe I've heard from God, maybe I haven't, and I started doubting and all that. But would God really want our marriage to break down as a result of this thought of following him to a new place?
Yeah.
And I just remember surrendering all that I had heard from God, surrendering all of it, and coming home and being like, Christina, you know what? It's not worth it. I feel like the enemy is gaining a foothold in our lives and our marriage, dividing, conquering like he does best. And I just said, let's stay. And in the exact same moment,
I had that the Holy Spirit was working in my heart. Like, this is not worth it. Yeah. This trying to stay, trying to go, trying to convince each other. Your relationship is really being fractured by this. So just lay it all down. Trust me in this decision. Lay down your will, lay down your expectations, and trust me. And so I was like, I don't know what that means, God, and I remember getting down on my knees and saying, okay, God, I trust you. And literally, half an hour later, he comes in the door.
Right, what God's doing in our hearts, and what we've really learned from that, because in the end, we ended up staying for another year, and then God opened up these doors for us to move to Nashville, live there for 5 years. That's where we started the podcast. That actually then ended up moving things toward us then coming back 5 years later, and all of that. But what we learned through that about discernment is that sometimes the result of what you are praying for is not really the point, right? God is doing a deeper work in and through just coming to him in the asking, in the waiting. And sometimes that's what God is actually more concerned about, the shaping of his children. But we often think that the in-between, right, is not really the point. It's the end. We got to go. But I really believe that he cares more about the in-between than the end.
It's so powerful, and such an incredible story of both of you having this experience where your hearts are softened to God. And he's shaping you. He's molding you to be more like Jesus. How can I serve you? That's kind of what you're asking each other in those moments. The In-Between podcast, it's part of the inspiration behind it was because in that season of your life, there weren't resources like that for you, especially free resources.
Completely.
Some of the issues that the In-Between podcast deals with for families and for marriages, what would those issues be today? What do you think the prevalent focus you have is?
I love how you were talking about the heart of that, because that really what it is. When we were married for 7 years, we didn't have a lot of money. People were saying go to counseling. We would have loved to go to counseling, but it was just at $200 a pop sometimes. It was just a little bit out of our reach. And so looking for those free resources, there weren't any. So that was our heart behind it, is just really how can we hear the pain of what people are going through, whether it's parenting, marriage. A lot of it deals with conflict, with social media, pornography, even in the home, whether it's through the kids or through the relationship with the spouses. How are things of those pain points? How can we give people these resources? It's not gonna, you listen to a podcast. We would love it if that was the thing that changes people's lives. It's not. It's God, but it's a tool to be able to even have a common ground and common language between parents, between a spouse. Like, hey, I listened to this podcast about disciplining children, or about how can we connect with children and with our kids. And then can you listen to this? And maybe we can come together and talk about it and have this level of understanding between us.
So good, and I love that you guys have personality testing on the website, where your podcast is housed. You have interviews, you have printouts and resources. I mean, you are saying to people, I'm going to equip you to have a healthy and thriving marriage connected to God, and you've lived that out. For our viewers watching right now, one of the main calls we get into our prayer center for Crossroads has to do with marriages. I mean, it's it's the highest ratio of calls almost, and it's marriages for the person calling in, their grandkids, their children. For the person watching right now who's in a season of pain and difficulty in their marriage, what would you say to them as a word of encouragement to help them along on that journey?
Yeah. My preaching coach had gone to Israel, and he found a rabbi, and he asked this rabbi this question about how often in our lives, or how much time do we spend in Egypt, in the wilderness, and then in the promised land. And I remember him telling me this story where the rabbi looks at him and he's like, oh, you Westerners, all you care about is being and living in the promised land, where everything is good and there's milk and honey and there's no conflict and all of that. But he's like, in reality, our lives, 10 to 15% of our lives are lived in Egypt. 10 to 15% of our lives are lived in the promised land, and 70 to 80% is in the wilderness. And I share that because sometimes we have this ideal that marriage, you're going to get married and you're going to be perfect and everything's going to be awesome. Or we strive for this state of no conflict. Or because based on, like you were saying, our childhood, and there's this sense of, okay, isn't everything going well when there's no conflict? But there's, through research, what's the percentage of conflict that's
perpetual?
That's perpetual, yeah.
69%.
Yeah.
Wow. In any marriage.
In any marriage, yeah. So that means that if you're thinking about your conflict, that 69% of it, you're not going to necessarily have an answer that you are like, okay, this is the way we need to do it, because there's all these different things of your characteristics, your personalities that come into it. So instead of looking at it like we were talking about, I'm right, you're wrong. No, I'm right, you're wrong. How can you come together and actually use conflict and learn the ability to have conflict in a way that you understand when your spouse is hurting, I stop and I listen.
So good. So much encouragement in this conversation for marriages and families across the nation. Daniel, Christina, thank you so much for being with us today. And I'm so thrilled that I can tune into the In Between podcast, and I can't say enough about it and the ministry that's happening here at Beulah and through how you're caring for married couples across the country.
Thank you. We were honored to be together with you.
Yes.
You're invited to experience the magic of love through the power of song. Enjoy an evening of timeless classics and heartfelt melodies. Mark Masry, Once Upon a Love Song, February 16th at 9 p.m. Stream live or on demand for free on the STV app.
Laura, such a great conversation with Daniel and Christina. You caught up with them at Beulah Alliance in Edmonton.
That's right, when we took 100 Huntley Street out on the road to Alberta.
Right.
Oh, it was such a great conversation. But you know what I really noticed just a moment ago was that singing. I think we all saw it. Oh my goodness, Mark, just to hear you sing like that. And I'm so thrilled. We're going to be featuring Once Upon a Love Song with you, Mark. You'll be singing. This is something that took place in the fall with the Burlington New Millennium Orchestra. And we recorded that with Yes TV in partnership.
So happy to partner with you.
There you are again. And that was how many hours of singing?
I mean, that was almost 2 hours of singing.
Wow. And he kept going and just beautiful. So this is about love with each other, love with God, romantic love.
Familial love, parental love, but ultimately divine love, God's love for us.
That's right. So this is our Valentine's Day gift to you for this Valentine's weekend, Sunday, February 16th at 9 p.m. and 11 p.m. You can tune in on the broadcast of Yes TV, check your local listings.
Or go to the Yes TV app.
Yes.
And you can watch it there for free. Absolutely.
Right. Yes.
Well, listen, if you're seeking deep and intimate connection with God, we're so loving Anne Voskamp's Sacred Prayer Devotional explores our invitation into this transformative relationship through prayer, vulnerability, and profound communion with the divine.
I don't know about you, but it can be easy to examine the ways of everybody else, or examine the news, the noise, the neighbors, or streams of Instagram or Facebook. All so much easier than examining my own heart. Because maybe what we are most fearful of is facing all of what we're feeling. Fear of deeply feeling loss, or deeply feeling anger, or deeply feeling abandoned or rejected, disappointed, shamed, disliked, unwanted, or unseen. It's tempting to become addicted to distractions, to living fast and furious, addicted to screens or to work or to all the whirl and the noise, all kinds of distractions, because we're afraid of being still long enough to examine our own hearts, to picking up a pen and a sacred prayer journal, to actually feel what's in our hearts, and to let what we really feel and fear catch up to us. As we are all together on this journey of sacred prayer, to have this way of life that is a continuous soul habit, a continuous way of thinking, following that acronym SACRED, S, stillness to know God, A, attentiveness to hear God, C, cruciform, to surrender to God, and then R, revelation, to see God. And today we consider E, examine, to return to God. It's only the examined life that passes the tests of life. The truth is, passing your days with no soul examination is how you fail your only life. And didn't David say, I've considered my ways and have turned my steps to your statutes? Psalms 119, verse 59. Didn't Paul implore, each one must examine his own work? Galatians 6, verse 4. If we don't examine the ways our hearts turn, it can be our very lives that end up not turning out as we had hoped or prayed. It was David who examined what was within him, and he began to be changed from within. Vulnerably, he wrote in Psalm 51 of his own heart examination, "Create in me a pure heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me." Psalm 51, verses 10 and 11. Ultimately, our sacred prayer joins David's prayer, and we experience this interior revolution, this interior turning. We examine our hearts to return our hearts to God, putting pen to paper as prayer, examining our feelings and fears and communicating them to our Father. This is needful, sacred work because communication of feelings, like they say, brings regulation to our feelings. Only what you name can you regulate. Emotion, the word emotion literally means to move, motion. Can we pause today, examine what's in our own hearts, write those emotions down, and let those emotions out of our own hearts put us in motion towards God Himself. When you have a daily sacred rhythm of examining the way your heart turns, your life can turn out far more fulfilling.
This month, as our thanks for your ministry support of Crossroads in 100 Huntley Street, we're excited to offer the book Sacred Prayer, 90 Days of Deeper Intimacy with God by beloved Canadian author Anne Voskamp.
True prayer isn't about changing God's mind, but about finding God's heart and letting His heart change our minds.
Drawing from her own intimate walk with God, Anne shares the profound yet simple sacred method of prayer. 6 steps that open the door to genuine communication with our Creator.
Through these pages, you'll discover how to transform anxiety into peace, turn routine into revelation, and make each prayer an intimate conversation with the one who loves you most.
With a gift of $40 or more, or when you become a new monthly partner, request your copy. Call 1-800-265-3100 or visit crossroads.ca/prayer.
Well, we want to encourage you to please make sure you get your copy of Anne Voskamp's book, Sacred Prayer, so you can journey with God in a new way. I'm just reading one of the points I made last week.
Your journal is full,
No, it
Laura.
is. I had a doctor's appointment, and I was worried about it, and I wanted it to be a positive experience, and it was. So, you can look back, and this becomes a journey with you. So call 1-800-265-3100 with your suggested gift of $40 or more. We would love to send this to you. This is something you can journey with, and God journeys with you through it, through all of the Bible verses in it and all the reflections.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. And thank you for your faithful support of this ministry. It means so much to us. Now, Laura, we talked off the top about love languages.
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to ask you first what, we should let our viewers know what the 5 are, just to refresh their memory. Words of affirmation, acts of service, receiving gifts, quality time, and physical touch.
Yep.
What would you say? And this was Dr. Gary Chapman that kind of came up with these languages many years ago from his family counseling work. Okay.
Well, so it's important to know what your love language is and then what your spouse's love language is. So I think mine is gifts, and I don't say that lightly because I don't want
doesn't
fancy
have to be big
gifts.
things.
No, but I'm always bringing people little tiny granola bars, and I realize that's my language. So I had to ask Jeff actually. He said no, it's gifts. So he'll show up with a coffee for me, simple things. What about you?
He's like, what makes her smile the most? It's a gift. For me, I think my dominant one is words of affirmation.
Okay.
And then gifts are kind of
What
recessive.
about Ange?
She's
lovely
definitely
wife?
gifts and quality time.
So what's quality time?
Quality time is being in the moment, being present with those that you love during that time that you've set aside for them. Otherwise, she'd rather me just go off and do something else if I'm distracted.
Don't be distracted. Put your phone away, put your watch away.
Take the watch off, put the phone on the counter, and just be with her.
It's a good word for all of us. That's really what it means to have quality time. Well, tomorrow we have Ron and Ann Maines, hosts of A Better Us with us. What a great week full of love.
And later this week, Rebecca St. James and her husband, Cubby Fink. We've got a great week still in store for you. Come back tomorrow.
Thank you for your ongoing support of Crossroads, a supporter-funded nonprofit organization and member of the Canadian Centre for Christian Charities. Thanks to faithful people like you, we are able to continue producing 100 Huntley Street. You can write to Crossroads, P.O. Box 5100, Burlington, Ontario, L7R4M2, or visit crossroads.ca to learn more about our programs.